Parenting styles represent the different approaches that a parent or a guardian can take in raising a child. The way the parents attempt to control and socialize their children, if at all. Do parents show a lot of affection, or are they very cold towards the child? Do they expect blind, unquestioning obedience, or do they allow children to ask questions and make comments about things? Do they enforce limits, or do they just let children do whatever they want? Your parenting style can affect everything from your child's physical health to how they feel about themselves as a person. It's important to ensure that your parenting style is supportive of healthy growth and development, because the way that you interact with and communicate with your child and how you discipline them will influence them for the rest of their life, and in turn, the way they might raise their own children in the future. So I want to just continue with this quote. The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. So a child that does not get the love and support that he or she craves during childhood is likely to spend a big portion of their life seeking it in other people or in other ways that might be detrimental to themselves or others. Sometimes for a child, negative attention is still some form of attention, especially if they don't even know what it's like to have positive attention. So they're likely going to act out in inappropriate ways, pull another student's hair in the classroom, or throw things all over the place and scream and throw tantrums. If they've learned that I don't get any attention at home, perhaps, then negative attention may be just as desirable as positive attention, especially if they can't really tell the difference. So the 4 main types of parenting styles, we have the authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and uninvolved styles. So we're going to start off with permissive on the upper left. Permissive parents are lenient. They often only bother to step in if there's some serious problem. These parents usually take on more of a friendship role than a guiding role with their children. They often encourage children to talk with them about their problems. You want your child to trust you, sure, but they tend to not even put much effort into discouraging poor choices or bad behavior. So yes, you want the child to tell you what they were doing at school, or that they try alcohol today, or whatever the case may be, but they may not be invested in teaching the child that is inappropriate behavior and what they should be doing instead. They're quite forgiving, and they tend to carry this attitude of children will be children. Yes, we said that before, but remember that your role is primarily as a guiding influence, a firm hand when they need it, not just their bestie who will let them do whatever they want. When they do use consequences, permissive parents may not make those consequences stick. They might give privileges back if the child cries or begs or just says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I won't do it again." But there's no real proof of them changing their behavior or doing anything differently. Children with permissive parents are more likely to struggle academically. They might exhibit more behavioral issues because they don't necessarily appreciate authority and rules, because it's not something that their parents have instilled in them. They often have low self-esteem as well, and may report a lot of sadness because yes, mommy or daddy is letting me do whatever I want. I am able to do anything that I feel like doing. However, sometimes the best way to show your child that you care for them is by being tough, by showing them that there are limits and rules because I want to protect you. A permissive parent may treat their child that way in an effort to show kindness, but it actually teaches the child that they're not cared about enough for you to set limits. These children may also have a lot more health problems as well, because imagine a child is allowed to eat as much candy as he wants in childhood. It may be hard for him to have self-control over his own diet as he gets older. And on the bottom left, we now have the uninvolved parent. These parents expect children to essentially raise themselves. They don't devote a lot of time or effort into meeting the child's basic needs. They may be neglectful, but that's not always intentional. Keep in mind that uninvolved parents aren't necessarily abusive parents. In some cases, the uninvolved parent may be providing basic needs, food, shelter, clothing, but they may not actually be emotionally there for the child. They're not actually interested in their life. They're not spending a lot of time with the child. They're passive. They essentially leave the child on their own. A parent with mental health issues or substance abuse problems, for example, might not be able to care for the child's physical or emotional needs consistently. Even if they want to, they just may not have what they need to give that to the child. At other times, uninvolved parents may just have a lack of knowledge about how to raise a child properly. And sometimes they're simply just overwhelmed with other problems, like managing a job, especially if they're a single parent and they have no other help in their life to deal with these children. Paying bills, managing the household. Children with uninvolved parents are likely to struggle with self-esteem issues because, again, you spent your entire life growing up feeling like mommy or daddy is never there. They're not here for me. They don't care about me. They don't have time for me. Even though, yes, it may not be the choice of the parent. In some cases, it may be. But if it's not the choice of the parent, it may not be something that they can do too much about on their own. But that can still have a devastating impact on the child's self-esteem and self-worth. They tend to perform poorly in school. They also exhibit frequent behavior problems and they rank low in happiness. And at the bottom right, we have the authoritarian parents, and this is something we may be accustomed to in the Caribbean. These types of parents believe children should follow the rules without any exception. No ifs, ands, or buts. What I say goes, because I said so. When a child questions the reasons behind a rule, that is not tolerated. They're not interested in negotiating with children, and their focus is entirely on obedience. They establish a strong position of power over the child. They also don't allow children to get involved in any kind of problem-solving challenges or obstacles. They tend to make decisions for the child, make rules and enforce the consequences with little regard for the child's opinion or desires. Authoritarian parents may use punishments instead of discipline. And again, there's a key difference here in punishment and discipline. So rather than teaching the child how to make better choices, rather than teaching them, oh, this behavior is inappropriate and this is what you should do instead, or this is why this is not acceptable, they're invested in making children feel sorry for doing something wrong, making them pay for their mistakes, making them associate suffering or negative experiences with the wrongdoing. Since authoritarian parents are usually strict, their children may grow to become fantastic liars in an effort to avoid punishment. Because another key thing about using punishment, it may not teach the child why the behavior was wrong. It may instead teach the child to be afraid of the person inflicting punishment. It may teach them that I could still do this thing. I could still steal snacks from the cupboard after you told me to stop doing that, because once I make sure I don't get caught, it's not that big of a deal. It will teach them instead, don't stop the poor behavior, make sure you hide it next time. Children of authoritarian parents are at a higher risk of developing self-esteem problems because their opinions aren't usually considered valuable in the home. They're taught often that somebody with greater authority than me will make the decision, that this person knows better than I ever could. And unfortunately, they may take that thought process into their adult lives and tell themselves that, oh, I can't really be responsible for making certain decisions because other people know better, right? They may also become hostile or aggressive because as they grow older, they may often focus on the anger they feel towards their parents, perhaps even passing this on to their children at some point. So now at the top right, we have the sweet spot, the ideal parenting style that we all generally should aspire towards, as hard as it may be sometimes. Authoritative parents have rules and they use consequences. However, they also take their children's opinions into account. They validate their children's feelings while also making it clear that the adults will ultimately be in charge. Authoritative parents invest time and effort into addressing the behavior problems before they truly take hold. They use positive discipline as opposed to punishment to reinforce good behavior. So, compared to punishment, discipline tactics utilize positive approaches. It encourages the child when they do something good. If the child does well on a test, you praise them and reward them. If they do poorly, you explain to them what they did wrong and you give them a suitable consequence. It's not about giving them licks or inflicting pain so they understand that you didn't like that. That latter approach would be punishment. The ideal is to reinforce the good actions, the good behavior. Praise them when they do the right thing or they follow instructions. Reward them. Children raised with authoritative discipline tend to be happier and more successful. They're also more likely to be good at making decisions because they have been allowed to use critical thinking. They have been allowed to make decisions and face appropriate consequences for the wrong decision. They have learned to evaluate safety risks on their own. Yes, you tell them what's right and what's wrong, but you give them a chance to learn the consequences if they make the wrong decision. They're also more likely to stand up for themselves and express their opinion, say in the workplace, for example, because they've been taught that no matter what, their opinion is valuable and how they feel matters in the real world, and they will carry that into adulthood. So we have a couple scenarios where we can think of the different responses a parent with each parenting style may use. So first scenario, you receive a phone call from another parent who says your child was writing harassing Facebook posts about her child. The parent says their child does not want to go to school the next day because of the comments on Facebook, because the comments on Facebook makes them so uncomfortable. When your child arrives home, you calmly bring it up with them, and they immediately become angry and begin yelling at you about how much they dislike this student. Now, an authoritarian parent may get upset and say, oh, they did something wrong. They may even use physical punishment to teach the child that they did something wrong. Maybe they embarrass the family and never do this again, and so on and so on. So, permissive parent might say, oh, well, I understand. Tell me about it. Tell me why you don't like that student. And they just let it go. The uninvolved parent may not even bother to address the situation. However, the authoritative parent will hear all sides as far as possible, stay calm even though the child is essentially having a breakdown and yelling and screaming. Stay calm no matter what. Walk away for a bit if you have to, because remember that being angry when you deal with the situation increases the likelihood that you will use excessive force or be more aggressive than you need to be. The authoritative parent will consider as many sides as possible. What is it that really happened? Yes, the behavior is definitely wrong, but what was the real motivation behind it? Did the child react that way for a certain reason? Was she or he being bullied in school? Were they being taunted, insulted? It's not about giving in, but it's about finding out what the root cause of the behavior is in order to prevent it from happening ever again. And perhaps addressing some other personal issue the child may have that other people were not focusing on. Scenario 2, you find a cigarette butt close to your home's back door. No one in your home is a smoker and you fear your child may have smoked it. You decide to check your child's jacket that is hanging by the door and find a packet of cigarettes. When your child arrives home from school, they deny that they smoked the cigarettes but are unable to explain whose pack of cigarettes was in their jacket. So an authoritarian parent, again, may get upset and say, oh, we don't allow smoking in this house, or smoking is bad for you, and give them a good cocktail to teach them a lesson, right? And that is how many of us in the Caribbean may have grown up experiencing discipline, quote-unquote, discipline in the household. That may be normal to some of us. However, that is not the most appropriate way to deal with the situation. The permissive parent may say, oh, well, I understand, you're curious, and they may just let it go. Or they may just give them a little slap on the wrist and not really follow up on what's happening or find out where they got that from, etc. The uninvolved parent may not even bother to check the child and ask the child where that cigarette came from. The uninvolved parent may just leave everything as is, leave the child with the pack of cigarettes, or maybe just take the cigarettes away and not even bother to find out where they got it from. However, the authoritative parent is going to ask, where did you get that? Is it that you're curious about these things? Do you understand the consequences of smoking cigarettes? You might have to consider that the child is naturally curious. Any child would be. This is an opportunity for an authoritative parent to educate their child and to warn them of the negative consequences and the negative outside influences that may have brought them to this place. Explain to them why smoking is dangerous without shaming them for being curious about it. Because you shaming them or avoiding the situation, again, will just mean they will figure out how to hide it better. They will go to someone else who would teach them about these things or give them more access to risky substances or material. You want your child to feel safe coming to you so that you have the opportunity to educate them properly. So this is just a table showing some of the traits associated with the different parenting styles. Note that one parent may not necessarily sit firmly in any single category, as in one parent may not always be authoritarian or always be uninvolved. It can fluctuate, and sometimes a parent may be more in one category than the other, or vice versa. A parent can display each of these traits at different points in time. So an authoritarian parent will have many demands. They may be cold towards the child, rejecting towards the child, but always strict on punishing the child if they do something wrong. They often use physiological control on the child. That's supposed to be psychological control on the child, by withholding love and affection. So you tell the child they did something wrong, and you withhold the affection from them so they understand that you're upset. That will damage the child's self-esteem very deeply. A permissive parent is warm, but not very attentive at all. They make little or no demands. They're not demanding in the slightest, really. However, they allow the child to do whatever they want, which can put the child in more risk. It can give them poor behavior patterns. It allows them to do whatever they want, especially out in public, because that's what you're accustomed to at home, getting your own way. The uninvolved parent is detached emotionally. They don't make a lot of demands, but they also don't follow up on anything. They don't punish either. They don't discipline. They don't do much of any of these things. They just generally have little to no involvement in the child's life, in the child's feelings or behaviors. The authoritative parent uses consistent discipline, but also explains to the child when they did something wrong. Why is it unacceptable? How do you improve? How do you do the good behavior instead? The authoritative parent is warm, but also involved. They are sensitive to the child's needs and opinions, and they encourage the child to express what they feel. They participate in joint discussion if there's some kind of disagreement. Some examples of each style, and remember that you can pause at any time to write down any of these. Say a child needs to clean their room. A permissive parent may say, it might be kind of nice if you clean your room, you know. They're lax, they're inconsistent, they don't really demand or enforce anything. An authoritarian parent, on the other hand, may say, if you don't clean your room, I'm going to take away your cell phone for good. You're not going to talk to any of your friends. They are a lot more rigid and strict. And all of these have very different effects on a child. An authoritarian style may make the child unfriendly and withdrawn. They feel like they're being controlled all the time. They're not very good at opening up to other people. A permissive style may make the child immature, dependent. They have very little self-control. They don't know how to take care of themselves properly. An authoritative style will ideally make the child good with social skills, good with interaction. Again, they're willing to stand up for themselves. They know how to negotiate better. They know how to express their feelings without becoming aggressive. They are more likely to be independent. So no matter what your parenting style is, there are some mistakes that all caregivers can make sometimes. Because at the end of the day, we're all still human, and we sometimes do things that we think will be an automatic solution to problematic behavior, but in the long run, it may actually leave the child a lot worse off. Like losing your temper. Again, if you deal with a situation while you're angry, you're more likely to be unnecessarily harsh, aggressive, or get unnecessarily physical with the child. Losing your temper and attempting to discipline a child is going to increase the chances that you may physically harm the child if you're angry enough. The second one is disagreeing on rules. So yes, you are the parent, you make all the decisions, you lay out all of the rules, but it's going to be hard for the child to follow the rules that they didn't agree to. It doesn't mean you allow the child to do whatever they want and for them to decide what's right and wrong, but there should be some amount of compromise and agreement on the rules to make it easier on both parties to follow them and enforce them. Third is treating children like small adults. And in this goes hand in hand with remembering that they interpret things differently from adults. What we say to them may not always come across the way we meant it. We have to remember that their brains function differently. They understand things differently. They care about different things than we do as adults. Fourth is bribery. So this seems like an automatic fix. When a child doesn't want to do something, or the child doesn't want to make their bed, they don't want to clean up anything, they don't want to wash the dishes, you might say, oh, I will give you $20 if you go and do that. Yeah, that might work the first time, and the second time, and the third time. But what it actually instills in the child is that I should only do these things if there is some tangible reward to get. It can work in some cases, but it attaches the wrong type of motivation to the good behavior. It makes it so that the child won't be able to do all these things if you aren't there to constantly give them a reward. Not to mention, it's gonna get really expensive on your part. Then there's unhealthy praise. Yes, we want to tell our children, oh, you did so well, or you worked so hard, I appreciate all your effort, but we don't want to praise them unnecessarily. If a child gets a D in a test, you don't want to say, oh, you did great. You didn't. I mean, unless there's a massive improvement, in which case you said, oh, you improved, but you don't want to say, oh, you're so fantastic, you're so great, you're such a genius. That's lying to the child for one, and it also puts a weird mindset in them that they don't really have to try very hard in order to impress people, in order to do well, when really you should be encouraging them to keep climbing for better. Then there's inconsistent discipline. You can't one day enforce the rules and then the other day, it's fine, just let it go, it's okay. You have to remain consistent throughout in order for it to stick. Otherwise, the child is going to think you're wishy-washy and they could get away with things on some days and on some days they won't. Finally, inappropriate punishment. And again, discipline is better than punishment. We want to teach, not necessarily control. And the discipline or the consequence should always fit the negative behavior. If a child accidentally breaks a glass, you don't want to smack them across the face for that. It was an accident, not to mention inflicting physical pain is not going to sort out the problem. Maybe perhaps you make them clean it up if they're old enough to be able to do that safely, or if you already told them over and over again, don't run around the house, and they ended up breaking the vase anyways, you take it out of their allowance. Something that matches what the bad behavior really was to begin with. Keep a lookout for these mistakes that we can easily slip into, especially if we're frustrated. Overall, though, the most important thing is to be flexible with your approach to parenting. While authoritarian parenting was more common and acceptable in the past, especially here in the Caribbean, there's some aspects of it that were always a little questionable, like corporal or physical punishment or licks, things that in this day and age would be considered abuse. Generations will continue to change, and children's receptiveness to different parenting styles will also change. Always be willing to learn and adapt to what your child needs and what they will be able to respond to. On the note of past parenting techniques that would be considered abuse in the present time, the next part of this series will cover child abuse, its many forms, and how to identify and report it.